Good morning or afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Capsule working. It has some check delay.
I am Ashad, and we are here in the preliminary debates round of the Pioneers 2027 conference to question the next 50 years. I will be adjudicating this debate session along with my assistant MC, Soyoung Choi. Also on the adjudicating panel, we have very esteemed Professor Soyoung Kim and esteemed Professor Byung-Han Sen. The scenario we will be discussing among ourselves would be global environmental change and innovative ways to address various issues rising due to this adverse environmental change. In today's first debate session, we have three very capable teams, namely Pioneer, Grady Greens, and Just in Time. The detailed rules of debates have been explained earlier in the orientation to the participating teams already, but before we start with the presentation and move on to the Q&A session, I'd like to gently remind the teams a few things. The purpose of today's debate, rather discussion, is not to discredit each other's ideas or undue criticism, but to have a constructive session to look out for ways to address global issues the world community may face in the coming years. As all of us are among the top elite of the highly ranked institutions across the world who have access to academic resources, it is our duty to world as future leaders, innovators, and intellectuals and policymakers to guide the world, give our insight, and play a role where it is needed. Your performance in this debate will be judged on some of the criteria, which have already been explained in the opening ceremony by the main MC, Dean. During the Q&A session, I would encourage all participants to actively take part and ask critical questions, but bearing in mind to maintain the decorum of the debate and mutual respect. At no point shall any participant raise questions with demeanors or use insulting remarks and slurs, and the respondents should also speak politely, perceive, and respond questions with respect. Undue criticism, disrespect, impoliteness, and overuse of rhetorical remarks will be penalized. I wish all the participants best of luck and may the best team win. I am personally excited to see how the teams have been working hard for their original ideology and policies and innovative ideas that resolve the current agenda. So without further ado, I'd like to open the presentation session today with Team Pioneer. You have 15 minutes to present your solution.
So I'll just share my screen now. Cool. Okay. Today, Emily and I, sorry.
I'm sorry. There's a glitch here. I'd like all the participants in this debate to keep the screen share by the main host on. The Pioneers 2071 shared screens.
Mm-hmm.
The presenters can share their screen, but all the participants in the view options, please select the Pioneers 2071.
Is that okay? Are we good to go?
So if everybody's seeing the screen shared by Pioneers 2071, we can move on with the presentation.
Oh. Okay. Today, Emily and I stand as representatives of Pioneer to share the policies and projects that we believe will most benefit Greenland. We present these to you in the form of a website, which can also be used as a source of information on innovation and policy, publicly available for the people of Greenland. When the scenario was first posed to us, three critical questions emerged. How can we create cost-effective renewable energy for a developing country? How can we raise standards of living without fossil fuel reliant growth? And finally, can high growth and sustainability coexist in a developing country?
So from these initial questions, Pioneer developed a set of sustainable goals that we kept in mind when developing policies and innovations. Firstly, to improve quality of life for the people of Greenland through food security, health, and welfare. And secondly, to reduce poverty by stimulating local economies, upskilling workers, diversifying assets, and investing in capital for future growth.
Thirdly, we wanted to increase renewable energy sources while still taking into account the above goals. And finally, we wanted to ensure that all these projects would remain committed to sustainable development. Ultimately, we wanted to include the diverse communities of Greenland in our policies and innovations, and in doing so, facilitate collaboration between the government and its citizens.
Our action series focuses on what can be done in Greenland to achieve sustainability and equality. These are the projects that will allow the citizens of Greenland to engage with environmental concerns and directly confront some of the extending humanitarian problems. Our accountability series looks to broaden this change through national governance and international policy. The policies that will be discussed aim at highlighting Greenland's responsibility towards sustainability, but also account for the limits of Greenland's capabilities as a nation that is still developing.
Our first project is a simple yet effective way to engage rural communities who have taken the majority of the impact of climate change. Currently, rural communities suffer from displacement when a natural disaster occurs and forces them off their land. This is further exacerbated as many do not have the means to resettle in safer areas as they rely on the land to provide for their income. Agroforestry is the process of planting trees in mass alongside crops. One of the problems that Greenland is experiencing is poor soil quality as a result of overexploitation and the use of chemical fertilizers, which has further degraded soil quality. The roots of trees act as stabilizers for the ground, as well as natural filters for surface runoff and groundwater. Trees also provide nourishment that studies have found directly contribute to more productive crop yields.
So this project is designed to stimulate local farmers into sustainable agricultural practices, whilst remaining conscious of agricultural traditions that have already existed. This will require collaborative efforts between the Greenland government and the people, and will be a learning experience for both scientists and rural communities. It will also be worth looking at the usage of genetically modified seeds that are more resilient to climate change, as well as fertilizing technology that would recycle wastage more effectively.
Following on from this, our second innovation is an offshore wind power system, which we have designed to have a relatively low implementation cost, as it can rely on recycled materials and pre-existing infrastructure. We want to emphasize here that we have been mindful of Greenland's need to maintain its high growth, and this means accounting for the fact that we need to minimize the costs of any renewable energy sources that we introduce.
Historically, data suggests that Greenland has been reliant on wind power produced by coastal wind farms that have since been destroyed due to rising sea levels. This past use of wind power as a renewable energy source implies three things. 1, the coastal areas of Greenland have suitable speeds for wind farms. 2, the technology and infrastructure that was used to maintain the wind turbines and to transport the electricity produced in the past likely still exists today. And 3, wind energy is cost-effective enough to have been relied on as a previous energy source. So these three factors together support our decision to adapt old onshore wind farm sites into offshore wind farms.
Offshore wind turbines require foundations tethering it to the seabed. Because the sea levels in the relevant areas are below 30 meters and have a soft seabed, it will be cost-effective to build foundations there. And we suggest placing the turbines in shallower water than the foundations require, so that when sea levels rise, they continue to remain effective. We also suggest research into a heightening strategy to allow the turbine to be extended if sea levels rise. Ultimately, offshore wind power is simple and cheap to implement, and is the cheapest alternative to coal energy, making it a very favorable source of renewable energy.
Of the three projects from our action series, wave power is the most ambitious and likely the most costly. However, Pioneer firmly believes that this project would be an innovative utilization of the current climate characteristics of Greenland. Why? Well, given the current circumstances, a significant portion of Greenland is submerged. This is a sign of shore erosion and unstable land. While agroforestry may abate some of the effects, wave power and living shorelines look to stabilize coastlines in a sustainable manner that is also cost-effective. Wave power utilizes the tidal waves that may be responsible for the flooding, whilst creating a barrier between the waves and the shore.
Members of Pioneer discussed the best way to harness wave power without damaging the existing coastlines, and the solution that has been raised were conservation projects aimed at creating living shorelines. Marshlands and mangroves are able to be implemented in Greenland in a cost-effective manner and involve local communities in the process. Both require building catchment reservoirs that can be sourced from local materials, utilizing pre-existing equipment. For example, on the island of Java, mangrove projects utilized nets and PVC pipes filled with concrete, as well as bamboo to create these catchments. They were also temporary and can be removed in time. Mangrove seeds are buoyant and they grow well in salty waters, making it easy to cultivate and conserve, whilst mitigating tidal forces that are a detriment to shorelines.
While innovations such as these three that we have discussed today have the potential to revolutionize development in Greenland, we believe that both national and international policies are required to ensure countries are held accountable for their emissions and pollution.
As you can see in this interactive visualization, the 2050 government budget allocates over half of the budget's funds towards defense and social policy. While these sectors are important for Greenland, Pioneer recommend a reallocation of funds towards productive sectors such as education, infrastructure, and energy, resulting in a more even distribution, as you can see here. Investing in these sectors means setting up Greenland's economy for future productivity. This will help Greenland to maintain the high growth necessary for development.
Currently, social policy takes up 36% of the budget, and we have inferred that a significant portion of this goes towards unemployment benefits, income support, and aid after natural disasters. These are all vital expenses in keeping the population of Greenland out of poverty. However, our reallocations will focus on proactive ways to mitigate climate change and reduce social inequality.
If government funds are allocated towards education, this will allow for funding to be injected into tertiary education, widening job opportunities and creating more jobs that are in demand. As unemployment reduces, so too does the demand on the government for unemployment benefits and other forms of income support. This allows Greenland's government to support its population and promotes sustainable economic growth.
Our second example, infrastructure, has a twofold benefit, both for the economy and for social welfare. These projects would be adaptive measures to climate change, such as flood-resilient public infrastructure or the implementation of public transport nationwide. Funding for public infrastructure will be limited by the budget of Greenland itself. And so it is with caution that Pioneer have suggested these changes be made early on rather than at a later stage of development.
As well as budget, we recommend that Greenland's government impose a new taxation and subsidy policy. This policy involves two components. First, taxation on returns from investments in businesses and industries that rely on fossil fuels, and second, subsidies for renewable energy users. We propose that the revenue earned from taxation is directly respent by the government in the form of subsidy payments for renewables.
This policy aims to support businesses and industries that use clean energy by subsidizing the cost of renewables so that they are a competitive alternative to coal, whilst penalizing industries that are heavily reliant on non-renewable energy sources. This encourages businesses to move towards clean energy by making renewables relatively inexpensive and will incite a transition towards renewables.
Currently, many developed countries rely on imports from developing countries as production inputs or as final products. Since these imports are produced offshore, the country in which they are consumed is not accountable for any of the emissions that went into the production process. This leads developing countries like Greenland to take full accountability for their high level of greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, we propose a system of global accountability, where the countries that are consuming products are also held accountable for the emissions that were released in the production process.
Under this system, every import should carry two costs. One, the market price, which is the normal price that you pay for a product. And two, the emissions cost, which is an approximation of the level of emissions that were released in the production process. At the end of the year, a country's emissions balance will reflect the total emissions produced in that country, plus a fraction of the emissions from imported products, and minus a fraction of the emissions from exported products, as you can see in the equation here. And so we believe that this net emissions value will be a fair reflection of the emissions that a country is actually responsible for. And this value will be utilized now in our second policy.
So we have developed a global emissions trading scheme that would be instigated as an international agreement. This scheme assigns a certain number of emissions trading units, which we will call ETUs, to every country. The quantity of ETUs that a country has acts as a restriction on the total level of greenhouse gas emissions that that country can produce annually without breaking the agreement. We believe that this scheme should distribute ETUs based on two factors. First, the country's population size, and second, its level of development, which we will approximate by using GDP per capita. This means that countries with larger populations will be allocated more ETUs, such that ETUs per capita are consistent for countries with similar levels of development.
Because all modern-day developed countries previously had periods of rapid industrialization, they have historically emitted large quantities of greenhouse gas that they have not been held accountable for. The ability to emit without accountability in the past has allowed these developed countries to gain the wealth needed to now transition towards renewables and other clean energy sources without relying on the same huge levels of debt that would be needed for Greenland to do the same. We therefore propose that developing countries are allocated more ETUs per capita than developed countries, thus allowing developing countries to produce a high enough level of emissions in order to sustain the industrialization process.
These initial distributions can be adjusted in the trading process. This enables countries to sell and buy ETUs from one another. For example, if one country already has a large proportion of its industries operating on renewable energy and low national greenhouse gas emissions, this country may not need all of its assigned ETUs and can therefore sell the excess units to other countries at the market price. This means that the number of ETUs assigned annually represents the upper cap on emissions. And though the distribution of who is emitting may change, the total global emissions can be restricted to thus reduce global pollution levels and improve quality of life globally. This concludes our policy proposal, which we hope has displayed that yes, sustainability and development can coexist, and that humanitarian goals can be achieved through sustainable avenues. I'll stop the share.
So that concludes the presentation. Okay, thank you very much for preparing a wonderful presentation. And I would like to move on to our next team presenting here, which is Greedy Greens. You may start presenting.
Okay, so we may start the presentation.
I would like to request everybody to view the Pioneer sharing screen from the viewing options once more. You may go on and start your presentation.
Okay, hello, my name is Kyung Her, and our team, Greedy Green, will present many solutions to solve the scenario problems today. Now, let me present you the Greedy Green's policy first. For Greedy Green's policy, we have three main goals: make a clean, sustainable environment by reducing emissions, promote economic growth, and assure citizens' happiness. We'll introduce 10 policies that we designed. Our first policy is carbon emission trading system, ETS. In this carbon trading system, companies are only allowed to emit up to their possessed carbon emission allowance. Minimum carbon emission allowances are given to each companies, and the remainder is sold through auctioning. The companies are free to trade their carbon emission with other companies. We expect that the companies will try to reduce carbon emission, look for alternative sources, and grow competitiveness in using energy efficiency. To help with the policy, the government will reduce the total carbon emissions slowly to help companies adjust to the policy and support companies trying to use alternative source of energy. Our second policy is differentiation of tax using ESG score, which represent environment, society, and governance score. Companies will be evaluated by fully reflecting non-financial factors such as environment, society, and governance, and affect corporate value and sustainability from long-term perspective. We would like to propose a method in which the entity's tax rate is determined based on the final score obtained by weighted average after scoring a fixed basis for various factors conceived in this ESG. In particular, reflecting the situation in Greenland, the higher the final grade of the relevant scores, the lower the tax the company can pay. This score can be higher if the environmental sector produces products more eco-friendly and market-related to the environment. Our third solution is eco-friendly fuel economy. One of the core problems we have to solve is to reduce the greenhouse gas emitted by cars. We seek to reduce emissions by cars by only allowing cars that show certain energy efficiency measured by kilometer per liter to be on the market. The government will impose additional tax on the environmentally harmful fuels. The tax imposed will be used to support manufacturers that use alternative fuels like natural gas, ethanol, hydrogen, and electricity. Our fourth policy is trash bank and volume-based garbage system. We need a policy to increase recycling rate and recyclability and reduce garbage. For better recycling, we will install trash bank nationwide that use barcode and AI that categorize recyclable trash. Users will be incentivized to buy recycling, and we foresee the amount of recyclable products to increase when our second policy, ESG score, takes into action. Also, we will start volume-based garbage system in which citizens should pay by volume of disposed garbage. Citizens will naturally try to reduce garbage as much as possible. Policy number 5 targets the fashion industry. As it is the second biggest water consumption industry, its aim is to allow fashion industries to be responsible for gas emissions and strive to reduce emissions. The policy can be implemented by setting a concrete target and making energy efficient improvements. By implementing this policy, brands will strive to adopt new ways to reduce emissions and raise credibility, which will contribute to sustainable fashion. In policy number 6, we suggest the future of food and farming. Greenland is having a serious food crisis, so major change is required in agriculture. The solution we've found is eatable insects and cultured meat. Both are reported to reduce huge amount of grain feed, greenhouse gases, land use, and water compared to conventional meat. Some may found this food choice is not preferable, but we believe continuous campaign and our VR capsule will change this point of view. By encouraging these kinds of alternative food, Greenland can change their agriculture eco-friendly future. Seventh policy is about raw material and metal industry. The mining, power generation, and production processes will all become eco-friendly. It will use electric self-driving equipment to mine raw materials, prepare clean power generation facilities such as hydrogen, and refine and recycle pollutants generated during production. Through this, it can create a virtuous cycle structure that attracts more foreign capital and prepares more eco-friendly facilities with such foreign capitals. Policy number 8 suggests compulsory education for all. This policy is implemented to provide quality education regarding the environment that triggers environmental awareness of Greenland citizens. The policy can be implemented by making mandatory environmental course in school curriculum and vocational education, along with cooperation with environmental NGOs when creating educational program. This will foster expertise equipped with problem-solving skills and halt global warming. In policy number 9, we focus on energy efficiency in two perspectives: electricity generation and electrical appliances. Managing energy efficiency is very important as the temperature rises and more energy is used for air conditioning in Greenland. For electricity generation, shifting coal-fired power plants to CCPP, combined cycle power plant, is needed. For electrical appliances, energy standards and mandatory labeling will be implemented. These policies are expected to reduce a lot of greenhouse gases and stabilize the overall energy prices. Our last policy is about popularizing VR capsules, which is the part of our innovative ideas. VR capsules can reduce carbon emission and help people enjoy reality-like virtual worlds in their homes. Also, VR devices can be utilized to extend our application of alternative food and education policies. Yet, several issues may arise, such as invasion of privacy and income inequality. To supplement this technology, proper policy such as rental service or privacy protection is required. This will eventually lead to the wide opportunity assessing VR capsules. Now, I will give mic to our innovator, Yewon Kim.
Hello, my name is Yewon Kim, and I will introduce the main concepts of our three innovative ideas. The first idea is a virtual reality capsule that can promote virtual economic activities. So let's begin with a motivating example. You may know about the movie Avatar that was released in year 2009. In the movie, the main character uses a capsule to connect to his avatar in another reality. From this example, we thought of an idea. How might we connect people to the virtual reality instead? So we present the VR capsule. As described in the image, while the person is using the machine, nutrition and oxygen will be supplied. Unnecessary waste will be emitted by the outlet. To enable fully immersive experiences in the virtual reality, sophisticated sensing techniques are used. A brain stimulation generator on the user's head will give the users electrical triggers to stimulate our senses, like texture and taste. For the nutrition supply, food ingredients with less carbon footprint are mainly used to make a nutrition pack. For example, instead of beef and cheese that have the highest carbon footprint, insects can be used to compensate for proteins. But don't worry, while receiving nutrition with no taste, the user can enjoy virtual taste in the VR world. Using the capsule, with the help of built-in software, users will be able to continue their life in the virtual world. If successfully deployed in 2071, there can be many applications of the VR capsule. For example, there can be a virtual offices. It will develop the knowledge economy in Greenland, especially the service, technology, and research domains. It will also reduce commuting. Or, for the virtual meal will initiate the new virtual food industry, including researches on tastes and VR restaurants, while reducing the food shortage existing in Greenland by cheaper nutrition ingredients. Also, as people less consume foods with high carbon footprint in reality, it will be environmentally helpful as well. The second idea is the green dome for relieving greenhouse gas emissions. Even though we try to reduce the amount of fossil fuel, 100% prevention of it would be impossible. Here we thought of an idea to remove the carbon dioxide emitted by inevitably using fossil fuels. Our idea came up from the recent CO2 capturing technology, in which carbon dioxide from emissions will be caught by specially manufactured pipes and get stored in a large-scale underground storage. Expanding this idea, we have come up with Green Dome, which adopts such technologies and expands CO2 capturing using a large-scale dome that can cover up areas with relatively high greenhouse gas emissions. The dome will capture the carbon dioxide from greenhouse gas emissions and transfer the molecules to the underground storage with special pipes. These pipes will enable them to quickly react with underground minerals, dissolving them naturally. In the underground storage, we also plan to recycle the captured carbon dioxide. Using specially designed pipes, we can either simply let them to be dissolved by reacting the molecules with underground compounds, or transport these molecules to plants to recycle them as biofuels. With Green Dome, we plan to significantly reduce harmful carbon dioxide emissions and relieve the environmental issues in Greenland. Not only just capturing the harmful CO2 gas from greenhouse gas emissions, but by also recycling it as renewable energy sources and biofuels, we envision to stop the temperate climate of Greenland getting hotter and reduce fossil fuel usages in Greenland. The last idea is the app called CodeTrack, which supports eco-friendly companies. In the reality, there is a wall between users and companies. Users often don't know how green a company is, and a company often misses environmental factors when designing a product for users. To solve this gap, we thought of a platform that will connect them. Specifically, we needed a platform that increases environmental sensitivity of users and companies while they are getting some profits as well. As a result, here comes the smartphone application CodeTrack, which makes every person and every company eco-friendly. For the company side, the people of Greenland can vote for the green companies. Here, each company is rated from A+ to D- based on their ESG score, which is our policy 2. The left image shows the screen where companies of primary industries are displayed with their grades. In the right, there is a company-specific page, in this case, Company A. Users can compare the EPS grades with other companies, and they are also given the score called ETS, which is a measure of green gas emissions introduced in Policy 1. Such visualization can enhance the competition between companies, and those with many votes will gain positive promotion effects for them. In the user side, they receive points when they vote for companies and buy products of companies with high grades. Users can use points when buying other products that green companies produce. To help users figure out the company when shopping, the application supports a QR code scanner, which informs the user about the company and the product. On the right, you can see the user membership page, which shows the point status. In such way, CodeTrack will provide environmental information to users, and in return, users will encourage companies to be more eco-friendly. Consequently, the applications will increase green awareness of both people and companies. This is the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for presenting your wonderful ideas. They were quite unique, I would say that. And I would like to move on to our last theme for presentation today, which is just in time.
Mic test, mic test. Is anyone able to hear me? Please give a thumbs up if you're able to.
Yeah, we can hear you clearly, Justin Wong.
Splendid.
And I would once again remind everybody to move to the screen shared by Pioneers 2071 in the viewing options.
Sorry, are we able to start now?
You may start your presentation now.
All right. Hello, everybody. So we are just in time, and today I'll be presenting on our policies together with Justin. So to start off, will be firstly our direction or where our policies and innovations are headed towards. So we'll be focusing on the balance between environmental impact as well as economical growth. Next, we will also be talking about social welfare, such as food, education, and healthcare. So a main reason for this is that we anticipate that Greenland citizens will actually be unwilling to accept all these sudden changes in their lifestyle. And so our policies are also aimed at addressing social unrest as well as encouraging the taking up of these new policies. So lastly is diplomacy, where we'll try to maintain an international presence because we know that not every country will accept what Greenland proposes on the international scale. So all our policies will basically be planned in such that we have short-term policies between 3 to 5 years, intermediate policies of up to 20 years, and also long-term policies of beyond that. Before continuing to the policies themselves, we are basing our policies on certain assumptions that we have gathered from the data. So firstly, we understand there is an income gap between the poor and the rich citizens. We also believe that there are multinational companies among the industries in Greenland, and these are the industries that we can tap onto when we're going to implement our policies. We also believe there are functional ports and harbors for shipping between Greenland and other countries, as import and export will be a huge part of our policy. So next, we believe that there is actually some existing technological support for tackling pollution and food production outside of Greenland, but these are not actively part of Greenland itself. So that's why we believe that Greenland actually has limited existing technology, and this is something that we'll be touching on. So we believe that the above mentioned technologies are also considerably more advanced compared to what we have currently. So next, some international organizations or NGOs, such as the UN or the like when in 2051, will be willing to offer loans for environmental or medical purposes. And lastly, while many organizations and citizens are sympathetic to the need for addressing environmental pollution, like we said, most of them will be unwilling to entirely compromise economic growth or actively support such a change. So to move on to our short-term goals and policies, we call this Greenland's Green Leap Forward. So firstly, we'll be targeting education to show that the benefits of addressing pollution will include a better, more efficient economy that benefits both citizens and nations. This also helps to address any fears that they may have. So next will be training, where we provide prospective employees the training they need to upskill and to find suitable jobs, especially in the new industries that we are going to work towards. As for international direction, and specifically the Daejeon Protocol, we hope to convince stakeholders that Greenland is indeed addressing all these issues that we are faced and trying to reach the sanctions that they have provided. So we are also trying to show that because we're taking the initiative to step forward, there is no need for extreme measures as well. Lastly, for food security, we hope to increase food imports and stockpiles, especially in the event of sudden crop decrease, as well as possible famines in the future. So in terms of education shifts, firstly, we'll be focusing on curriculum shift towards a greater focus of environmental issues and food solutions. As for health literacy, we hope to promote public health awareness, especially on the different diseases that may come about due to the poor environment. Next, for promoting environmental R&D, we definitely encourage private and public as well as academic research in Greenland. So this includes trying to get experts in the different fields over for knowledge transfer. Lastly, for public debate, we hope to encourage public discourse so as to enrich ideas and policies at the community levels such that all new policies will include both top-down and bottom-up approaches rather than just the government trying to push out policies that citizens may not be open towards. As for Greenland's international direction, we hope that we can set up some sort of international collaboration to negotiate the Daejeon Protocol targets, as well as develop collaboration funds with the UN to allow for short-term borrowing or funding. And lastly, we will set up the Green Leap Advisory Community. As for technology transfer, because we are first time for Greenland exploring all these new and different technologies, we hope that we can encourage MNCs operating in Greenland to spearhead such initial technology transfer so that we can boost the standard of living and use greener technologies. Lastly, the country hopes to declare war on climate change and use HTA to actually analyze the cause of climate change as well as the population. And then we hope from there we can draft regulations to fight climate change. For the environmental side, we look to retrofit industries with the latest technology, such that even industries that are focused on profit at the expense of the environment are promoted to include purifying devices such as flue gas desulfurizers or even catalytic converters. Following that, we also hope to reduce the usage of coal and fossil fuel. As from the data says, Greenland still heavily relies on things like diesel, even in the 2050s. So we hope that we can reduce this and increase green technology, as well as increase coal washing rate, as well as finding alternative sources of power, such as either as biomass, algae biofuel, or even water and power waves. Lastly, in terms of food security, previously mentioned, we look to increase in stockpiling, such as increasing import of foods for storage, including non-perishables. So we hope that by doing this, we can reassure that citizens will have secure food, as well as there won't be any influx in prices and there will always be food price stability. For partnerships, we hope to develop multilateral partnerships to ensure stable food imports or even set up trade agreements. We also hope to explore alternative farming as well as cell culture technology and meats through these partnerships. And lastly, for public awareness, we want to assure citizens that there will be food supply and that to launch campaigns of healthier eating to prevent micronutritional deficiencies and also ensure them that because there is sufficient food, there is no need for excessive buying as seen in many pandemic situations currently. So now I'll pass on the time to Justin.
Thank you, Caroline. Give me a second. All right. So many of these policies that Caroline has mentioned are mostly to set a firm foundation and to address some of the short-term urgent needs that Greenland has. Moving forward, we will have a firmer foundation to implement more of our policies and objectives in the future. This includes creating a green hub ecosystem in which we can create a critical mass of startups which are related to addressing environmental aid as well as food security in Greenland. Some examples of possible solutions including encouraging local companies and MNCs, including the gas mask industry, to tap on their competitive advantages in order to innovate and produce industry solutions to reduce emissions. Similarly, among a workforce that has been increasingly adequately skilled and able to address cities' problems, we'll be promoting local research and development in relevant areas, while also providing further and continued technology and knowledge transfer between private and public sectors. And last but definitely not least, we will be including policies to smoothen the implementation of such measures into the industry. So, an example of such measures includes technology-infused vertical farming, which is important in Greenland as the amount of available arable land for farming is compromised by rising sea levels as well as increasing occurrences of floods. So ideally with vertical farming, we'll be able to set up areas where farming does not require specific types of venues in order to be able to effectively grow crops. Furthermore, other additional features such as using aeroponics as well as nutrient infusion can also be used to increase the value of these foods and indirectly address the health of citizens as well. On a similar note, research and development can also look into cell-cultured meats as well as alternative energies created from biomass, which in the long run helps us to address emissions by reducing livestock emissions as well as being able to gain renewable sources of energy. Last but not least, many of these measures, as well as food, perhaps from new forms of farming, are very new and may not have been available in Greenland in the past. So education and training will be important to increase the acceptance of these new forms of food as well as technology, while also producing a skilled workforce capable of providing services in such areas. On another note, To begin addressing the issue of emissions, some ways that we can go about it is through architectural decisions. For instance, in building materials, we can use more materials capable of absorbing carbon, which in the long run helps to improve the carbon footprint by actually storing carbon dioxide, which is in the atmosphere. Additionally, architectural choices in design will help us to address the issue of over-reliance on artificial ventilation and light, such as through larger windows, which can be used to increase ventilation. On a similar note of architectural choices, vertical forests are another concept which we have pushed forward as our product and which more details can be found in the written solutions. Essentially, aside from the plants being able to decrease the amount of air pollutants as well as emissions present in the areas with vertical forests, studies have also shown that access to plants is able to have positive effects for workers' mental health, especially in the office. Other areas that we'll need to address includes forest fires, which is a possible occurrence due to the dry mountainous regions. Some measures that we have looked at include planting trees as well as vegetation, which are more resistant to fire, as well as considering preemptively addressing the issue of fire spreading through dry forests, while also in vulnerable farmlands, providing more facilities as well as infrastructure that is fire resistant and allows them to be more resistant to the effects of spreading fires. About another issue that is challenging the agriculture situation in Greenland, we'll be using seawalls to limit the effect of soil erosion as well as decreasing arable land in vulnerable agricultural areas, which also gives us more time to focus on finding and developing long-term solutions to alternative means of farming, while concurrently using flood tunnels. This will be useful in helping to divert excessive floodwaters, especially during monsoon seasons, as well as to preserve important equipment as well as industries in vulnerable regions in order to prevent the effect of floods on the local regions. Beyond that, we'll be also looking to streamline the transport processes. For example, we are proposing a long-term construction of a railway, which relies on more efficient energy transports that produce much less emissions compared to conventional road or air transport in the form of a centralized transport method that emits less. Additionally, on sources that require private vehicles or transport, we'll be restricting quotas in order to limit the amount of emissions produced by these vehicles, such as, for example, implementing the use of catalytic converters in the emissions. Some advantages of a railway include increasing logistical connectivity as well as social connectivity to areas and communities which were previously less accessible. Last but not least, we'll be looking at other measures in the long run to increase social as well as environmental issues in Greenland. For instance, among citizens, we can look towards eco-gentrification, or the process of making houses cleaner and greener, such as promoting the appliances with lower energy usage, while also introducing legislation to smoothen the process of eco-gentrification as well as other measures. And last but not least, introducing tourism and or ecotourism as an option to increase support for conservation as well as the economic viability of long-term conservation. Among the community, we'll be developing more medical facilities to address possible issues of long-running air pollution, as well as introducing mandatory immunization against tropical climate diseases, which are increasingly an issue in Greenland, while also addressing the issue of mental health among the workforce, alongside promoting pro-environmental measures. Last but not least, our text will be relooked to cover two areas. Firstly, economic redivision from the wealthier to the poorer in order to increase social mobility, and excise taxes in order to address possible polluters such as diesel vehicles, as well as carbon emitting products. With that, thank you for your attention, and we have come to the end of the presentation for Just in Time.
Thank you for your presentation, and it was just in time. All the ideas presented by our esteemed participants were great, and they were presented in a very elaborate and articulate manner. And I thank you all the participants and all the presenters for their time and effort. Now we would send you into breakout rooms for a period of 10 minutes, which is a break session, and then we will come back here for the question and answer session. I'd request everybody to wait patiently. It will take just a few minutes for us to share our screen. In the meanwhile, you guys may prepare yourselves mentally for the question answer session. Okay, we are going to begin the question answer session, and I hope all the participants are able to hear my voice clearly. My first question is directed to Pioneer, and anybody from the team can answer. Um, in your solution that you proposed, you talked about global emissions trading scheme, and which was not something unique to the solutions presented in all the three teams. My question here at this point is it an alternative to Dajon protocol? What will be the Greenland's target carbon dioxide emission? Because that seems to be one of the key critical issues that have been highlighted in the scenario.
So I think that we haven't actually thought about the exact quantity of emissions that we would want to aim for. That's probably something that, because a protocol like that, which is a huge international agreement, would obviously be quite hard to pass through the governments of other countries. And I think it would end up being a global decision on like the suitable amount of emissions per unit. And I think that it would end up being like a global target that's decided first. And then after the global target is decided, you then work out the distributions after that. So we hadn't worked out an exact quantity that Greenland would particularly aim for, but I think that's something that would come out of the process of initiating that international agreement.
Does that conclude your answer?
Yes.
Okay, you still have 2 more minutes to go. So if anybody wants to elaborate on the solution or the answer.
I think
Okay, I'll move on to my next question. Sorry, you were speaking, Amna.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
Can I move on to my next question? You still have time. All right. My mic was muted. Okay, my second question to Greedy Green, the team Greedy Green here is, can you exemplify carbon dioxide capturing plants or domes that you proposed in your one of your innovative ideas?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question, please?
Okay, my question is, in one of your innovative ideas, you presented a scheme in which carbon dioxide is captured, which is emitted by the industries, and chimneys are captured again and they're converted into natural other so they're mixed with other agents to convert carbon dioxide to other forms, which are not harmful for and thus reduce the global greenhouse gases. Can you exemplify any of such schemes which are being implemented in any countries?
Oh, okay. So the carbon capture technology itself is already being deployed in multiple fossil fuel using factories worldwide. For instance, in Norway, the Carbon Dioxide Technology Center, which is acronym of TCN, at Mongstad, began construction in 2009, and they include 2 capture technology plants, both capturing the flue gas from 2 sources. And Norway also envisions to build $3 billion carbon dioxide capture project called Longship, and with such efforts worldwide, we believe that sufficient technology for green dome can be developed by 2051.
All right, do you have anything to add to that answer?
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you very much for answering the question. And now I will move on to my next question, which will be to our last team presented here just in time. There's a radical solution here that you guys presented, quite a few solutions. Food security. One of the proposal that I saw in your presentation and also in your detailed solution was importing food to cater for the food prices and stockpiling it. So my question is, with the current environmental solution and lapse in the livestock yield across the globe, and particularly in Greenland, isn't importing food an expensive option for the government? Globally, the food prices will be high. So is it a sustainable proposal? How long can the economy of Greenland bear importing foods?
Right. Okay. So with regards to that, that's why we actually put stockpiling and importing of foods as a short-term measure. So it's not meant to be a over time we'll just keep importing and importing, but it's just that it's in case of any emergencies. So between 3 to 5 years we'll still be importing foods. And so during this time, while we are still importing and stockpiling the foods, we are also exploring the different alternative farming methods as well as cell cultured meats and foods. So the stockpiling is just basically to ensure that there's enough food while our new technology is still being developed and taught to our citizens. So after this new technology is up and running, we'll no longer be stockpiling the foods anymore. So we do not foresee it to be a huge economical impact on Greenland's budget.
Perhaps I could chime in with a few extra words here. So what happens is that stockpiling has shown to be remarkable, especially in areas where they are resource scarce in food. So for example, in Singapore's case, because of COVID-19 and a previously enacted regulation to stockpile at least 3 months of food in warehouses in Singapore, we have managed to keep prices stable through this certain mad scramble for food and other sort of products. So similarly, we think that this is not just for a current measure, where foodstuffs and the stockpiling of it will only help people today or tomorrow. And in fact, such a long-term plan can help them further down, should there be any sort of further pandemic or any sort of further natural disaster happening in the region and affecting Greenland as a whole. So this stockpile, even though it's meant to start as a measure in the short term, it has long-term implications. Thank you, and I hope the answer was a bit more comprehensive.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any questions from other participating teams? I'm being co-hosted and joined by my assistant MC, and there are no questions in the chat. I would like to remind the participants that asking questions and asking critical questions in the debate would yield you engagement points. And we have a question by Amina from pioneers.
Yeah, so
I'd like to ask you, which team do you want to ask the question? Where the question is directed to?
this question is directed to Greedy Greens.
Okay, let me have their permission first. Greedy Greens, do you accept this question?
Yes.
All right, Amna, you may go ahead.
Yeah, so I was really interested in your virtual reality product, and I was wondering if you had considered maybe, what's the word? Combining it with your app to create virtual market spaces. And that would like limit the amount of people going out to go shopping, but it could also be a way to integrate like sustainability in your app, just like to integrate shopping, like sustainable shopping, sorry, in your in a virtual market space. Things like virtual art galleries exist where you can use Bitcoin and the likes to shop for things. And if you integrated your app where you can see where they're like sourced, whether that brand is ethically or sustainable, then I think it would be a really cool idea. I was wondering if you had considered that as well.
Greedy Greens, your answer.
Yeah, like we thank you for your suggestion. It is really cool and is very creative. So actually we have thought of many application cases for the virtual reality capsule. And we also thought that
I think there's network problem, so I will talk rather than her. Yeah, we also thought to adopt this VR system to whole society, not only the VR just virtual world that providing our alternative food or education system. So we think we can accept your ideas to expand our VR virtual worlds to marketplaces. We just thought to start with the virtual food and education and then expand later. I think your suggestion is very good idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And it brings me to my next question, which is also to Greedy Greens. I'd like to ask them their proposed, one of their proposition was for, I had an interesting question in mind. Yeah, what other source of energy can be utilized? Because there's a dilemma that had been highlighted in the scenario given, which is because Greenland is a developing country which has recently undergone an economic boom owing to the industry, which is thriving based on fossil fuels, which contributes 75% of its energy need demand. So we need to find a source of energy that can, to a significant extent, compensate the fossil fuel. And what are your thoughts about exploring a new source of energy? Greedy Greens.
Actually, we proposed biomass at our proposal presentation, but we deleted because of running of time. We thought of the using biomass for alternative energy source. Also, maybe we can use hydrogen or other things except using sunlight, because in the scenario, they're explaining that there are lack of sunlight because of lots of dust, or other maybe some alternative energy using wind. We thought that's not very effective because of we need lots of money to install all those facilities. So we thought of using hydrogen or biomass or other things.
Okay, we will continue this questioning line further, but before that, I'd like to take a question from participating team Just in Time. Skander Salman from Just in Time wants to ask a question. May I ask where do you want the question to be directed?
I would like to ask the Pioneer.
Pioneer, do you accept the question?
Yeah, sure.
All
Okay,
right.
go ahead.
My question to Pioneer is that the increased availability of renewable energy and the introduction of measures to promote carbon reductions are commendable in improving current emission problems. However, if the growth of industry were to focus on current trajectories, including industrial production, or adopt other polluting trajectories, including construction, will the suggested solutions be sufficient to address growing environmental strains? Or will there be measures to direct economic growth in less emissions-reliant industries?
Well, I think that what we've kind of been focusing on in terms of those investments that go into infrastructure and that type of thing is that by nature, those types of investments would rely on fossil fuel growth, which is, a huge portion of what Greenland already relies on. But because of the productivity benefits that will result from those investments now. So, for example, if we began infrastructure projects in the next few years, the infrastructure that results from those projects, so both through like the building of renewable energy sources and also through transportation mechanisms, these would increase the efficiency of different economic problems in the economy. So it will increase the efficiency of transportation and other things like that. And the increased efficiency that results from that will actually reduce the future dependence on fossil fuels and increase the infrastructure available for renewables. Yeah, did anyone else want to add something?
The team Pioneer still has 1.5 minutes remaining.
I think we're good. Thanks.
Which team do you want to ask the question, Kyungi?
Oh yeah, we want to ask question to Just in Time.
Just in Time, would you like to take this question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your interesting presentation. We have question about your policy 1, seawall. We found that seawall construction cost $200 to $700 per meter. Given the area of Greenland is 217,486 kilometer square, 3 sides of Greenland would be approximately 1,400 kilometers. As farmland is spread widely in Greenland as seen in the map, the vast majority of Greenland would have to be constructed to actually protect agricultural land, but only covering 1/10 would cost $28 million to $98 million. Also, additional cost is currently needed to sea level rises. So our question is that does Greenland can afford this cost?
Okay, thank you for your question. I can take this. So we believe that the reason why we went to seawalls is that we actually really believe that the threat to the coastlines by the rising sea levels is a big, will impact Greenland really greatly because, I mean, primarily it was agricultural land. That's where it gets its name. It has its roots in its agricultural land. So we believe that we need to take measures in order to address and make sure that agricultural land isn't affected by the rising sea levels. So while yes, it is a very expensive endeavor to take on construction of these seawalls and underground flood tunnels, the benefits of it will make up for the cost. So, but dealing with the amount of land area that has to be filled by seawalls in the first place in order to make it effective, I think that the best way we have to reduce the cost is that we target which agricultural lands are primarily the most important to grainland, which crops like provide as much food as they can to the grainland's population. So by targeting like only important crops, we can reduce the expenditure on seawalls. So yeah, that's the considerations that we have. So if we can just target like important crops that would fulfill like 80% of the goals that we have for saving agricultural land. Hope that answers your question.
Sorry to interrupt. I would also like to add on a bit to Tina's answer. Thank you. On the note of selecting areas, if you would refer to the territorial depiction, certain areas of grainland are actually more susceptible to rising sea levels, which may be due to different factors such as soil erosion, as well as lower elevation altitudes to begin with. So that is another consideration for us to selectively build seawalls instead of covering the entire coastline. Furthermore, there may be other solutions as well which are feasible alongside agricultural promotion, such as the usage of if I'm not wrong, dikes in the Netherlands, which allows agriculture near sea levels, even though large portions of the Netherlands are actually at altitude below sea level or were previously swamps. So similar solutions can also be explored with to encourage continued agriculture even at areas which are currently or previously at risk. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your answer. And I'd like to remind here that the honorable professors, they may unmute themselves for any question at any point after the responders have responded. So if you have any questions, you may unmute yourself and speak and direct your questions to any team you may choose. For the participants, they have to seek permission so that the other team can accept the question.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Yeah. First of all, I really enjoyed both presentations and the pre-discussion reports. I was really impressed by the quality of your talks. So I have one question that applies to both Pioneer and Greedy Green. So you both suggested ETS or something similar, but have you considered a scenario where this policy can be misused to buy out the responsibility to keep the pollution down? For example, suppose there is a very dirty but very lucrative industry making a lot of money. And on the other end, you may have a very high costly but very clean technology industry. Then you may consider investing a lot of money on dirty but making a lot of money industry, and you can pay back, you can buy the ETUs and get away with the responsibility of keeping pollutions, keeping environment clean. So have you thought about this, the unwanted scenario, and what is your thought on that? I want to hear from both Pioneer and Greedy Green.
Thank you, Professor, for your
May
question.
I first answer the question? You can go first.
All right, Greedy Greens, you may respond first and then followed by Pioneer.
Okay, well, thank you for your question. Yeah, that's one of the cases that ETS can be misused, as Professor just pointed out. So we didn't really actually mention all the corner cases of this, but we actually considered that case, and we thought that that could be prevented through the auctioning. So we said that the remainder of the gas emissions are sold through auctioning. So this means that the government can kind of control the ETS, I mean the allowances that each companies can have. So if one company tries to dominate all the ETS
allowances, then before the company does that, the government can let that particular company out of the auctioning site so that they cannot really buy the remaining allowances.
To add some more, we also wrote in our writing document that we should make some laws to prevent collusion of the companies so that they can auctioning their ETS system well and also paying tax more through ESG score. So by this method, we think we can prevent the problem that Professor said. And lastly, we have also code track application. This code track application is explaining how this company working hard to become eco-friendly company. So they can appeal their advantage through this app to consumers. So with through all these processes, we think we can prevent that problem Professor suggested. Thank you.
All right, we will take the answer now from Pioneer.
So firstly, I think our policy, because it was a global emissions trading scheme, which is something that's never been done before as far as I know, the logistics would be a little different. But the problem that the professor suggested would still be a problem in that richer countries could buy out trading units from the smaller countries because they can afford that. And it would mean that the developing countries, if they did choose money instead of the units, would have a limit on the emissions they could produce. But because of the way the trading system would work, they would only be willing to sell for a high enough price that you assume that then the money they got from the sale of those units to the country they were selling to would allow for them to make investments in clean energy and move away from fossil fuels enough to not have to rely on the emissions that they would need those units for. And so we kind of assumed that the market would take care of that. But obviously it's true that wealthier countries could do that and buy off the trading units because they can afford it. And secondarily, because national countries will likely have their own policies that will try to limit fossil fuels. For example, the way we developed Greenland's policies is that beyond the global policy, it also has its own policies that make sure that it produces only a fixed amount of fossil fuels, and it penalizes fossil fuel use and encourages renewable energy use. So I think that the internal government of each country would also try to make sure that the places that fossil fuels are being used within their country are in a way that encourages the most economic growth. Yeah, that's mostly it.
And if I could also just add on really quickly, part of our emissions trade, like our global emissions trading scheme, is that we take into consideration consumption rates as well. This means that countries that are consuming end products that have been made using technologies that utilize fossil fuels will also have to take into account that portion. So not only are producing companies, like carbon emitting companies, are also held accountable, but people that are consuming these products will also be held accountable through this emissions trade scheme.
Thank you for the answers. Very good.
Yeah. Before taking any questions from participants further, I have one question from Pioneer, if they can. They suggested wave power, harvesting the wind power, sorry, the offshore wind. So my question is, Is it sustainable means to cater for Greenland's rising energy needs? Because currently what Greenland needs is industrialization for this economic prosperity, which is very essential. And we need cleaner means of energy. So looking at the data that was given to all the teams, the current wind power, it only caters for about 1% uh, of the total energy consumed, whereas the fossil fuel is 75%, and this difference is quite drastic. And since developing countries much have higher energy demand, what is the cost effectiveness of wave power versus fossil fuels?
So,
oh,
yeah, no, Emily, you can go. You can go.
Okay, I'll just pop in with what I think I remember from the statistics. I'm pretty sure that wave power is the second most cost-effective form of energy in Greenland, and from memory, it was about 40% more expensive than fossil fuels, which is still a lot. But because wind power at the moment only accounted for 1% of the contributions to fossil fuel energy levels in Greenland, and it also said that a lot of the wind power had been destroyed through rising sea levels. So that's what gave us the idea to convert it into an offshore system, because that will be unaffected by rising sea levels. And it takes advantage of the fact that Greenland has a lot of shallow waters, which used to be just normal land that's now covered in water. And the land used to be used for farming, so it has soil. And that's ideal for offshore wind farms. And so we think that although it would be a large investment required, it would also produce a lot of energy, and the type of energy that it produced would be much more cost effective than most other forms of renewable energy. Siddhi, would you like to add something?
Yeah, and just on top of that, when we are implementing wave power and offshore wind farms, we are looking at trying to include communities that border the shoreline. And in doing so, we are creating small economies, and we're stimulating economies in that area by looking at conservation of mangroves and ways to develop these innovations, so to speak. And these will be cost-effective ways to implement some of the things such as seawalls. They're natural and they are sustainable as well. And they include, they're trying to be inclusive of the surrounding communities, which will ultimately benefit Greenland's economic activity in the future too.
All right, thank you for your answer. And there is a common question to all the teams from Professor Soyoung Kim. So I'd like to leave the stage open for Professor.
Thank you for all the wonderful presentations. And I guess all of the teams have looked at the data provided by the preparation team. And my question is related to the cost implications of your technological solutions, just because as you can see in the economy sheet of the data on Greenland, this country per capita GDP was only $45 when in 1970 compared to almost 3,500 for OECD. And then by the year of 2015, 2050, it becomes 28,000, but OECD average is 97,000. So still it's only about 30% of the average. And also the government budget devoted to energy is only 6% even in 2050. So the implication is you cannot actually spread out all these options, so that you have to actually prioritize all these technological ideas. So my question to each team is, if you face that sort of a budget constraint, and of course all kinds of oppositions from, say, environmental groups and also large corporations. So which technology seems to be actually the best if you have to choose? That's the first question. But if I have any time left, then I'll ask another question later.
Thank you, Professor. And the answer order, I'd like it to be just in time, followed by greedy greens, and then pioneers. So just in time, we're waiting for your answer.
Hi, I'd like to start our response. So in response to the possible issue of budgetary restraints, we consider a few different factors in this consideration during our planning. Firstly, when we're looking at the data, we notice that the information being shown is actually GDP per capita, which may not be an accurate representation of the net GDP of the country. So for instance, in a major economy like China, the GDP of the country as a whole is actually extremely significant, but it is difficult to say that the GDP per capita of the country is equally recommendable due to a significant difference in income between lower socioeconomic status citizens as well as higher socioeconomic status citizens. So we concluded that it may not be an accurate representation of the actual budget that the Greenland as a whole has. Additionally, many of our measures in promoting technological advancements as well as alternative solutions to address environmental change, including coastal degradation, includes factoring in private as well as external factors such as overseas companies as well as local firms and academics, which helps to divide the resources spent among local economies as well as communities, such that the government alone is not bearing the cost entirely. Would anyone like to add on to the response?
Yeah, there's 1 more minute left for the answer.
Testing, anyone hear me?
Yeah, 50 seconds.
Okay, great. Yeah, so to build on Justin's answer, now I do believe that GDP per capita is not really the best metric for the economic status of a country. But in terms of what we can do in terms of resource allocation, I think the most important thing to invest in would be education. Now, 50% of the workforce are in tertiary services, and it seems to be gravitating towards more of a knowledge-based economy. But still, with the economy being mainly powered by diesel, I would say that most of the expertise still rely on diesel and require this paradigm shift towards more green tech. And that requires time, that requires resources and more infrastructure. So that would be the most important thing, to raise the literacy of eco-conservation and ensuring that the workforce are able and well-equipped to get those jobs in future as well. And from there, we can pivot ourselves towards a greener direction and take that green leap forward.
All right, that lapses your time. And now we'll take the answer to Professor's question from Team Greedy Greens.
Okay, Professor, thank you for your question. So our team's ideology was that we cannot really sacrifice either economic growth or environment. So in our policies, we had some of the policies to actually gain some money so that we can use for other solutions as well. For example, the ETS has carbon emission allowances, and they can earn money through, the government can earn money through auctioning. And for eco-friendly fuel economy, additional taxes are imposed on environmentally harmful fuels. Also, by using volume-based garbage system, the government receives tax on the volume of disposed garbage, and by the energy efficiency policy, we can lower the overall energy prices eventually.
And to add, for the technology perspective, we have 2 statements to argue. So first, we have the CodeTrack, which is our third innovative technology, which is a web platform that eases user and company interaction. So it is basically a web platform run by the smartphone. So we assume that it is cost-free. So it can be a first cost-free solution. And except that, VR technology can also be a good solution for the problem that Professor has suggested, because we assume that in VR tech, in 2051, VR technology has been globally developed. So it is the same notion as smartphones and tablets in the modern society. So, which means that its price is cheap enough to be commercialized. And also, since we promote economic activities in the virtual reality, we believe we can compensate the money spent on adopting those devices on creating more money for the by the activities. Thank you.
Is there any time left?
There's 50 more seconds.
To add more, in order to receive overseas investment, environmental and responsible management, sustainable business is now being emphasized in 2021. So we expect that in 2071, those environmental areas are expected to have a greater impact in investment decisions. So by changing eco-friendly future, we can get more investment from overseas. So this investment will create more eco-friendly facilities and continue the virtuous cycle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And now we are quickly moving to conclude our question and answer session. So we will take last questions from the teams. I'd like to take a question from Bricky from Pioneers. I'd like to ask, who do you want to ask your question to?
I'm sorry, we haven't answered the last question.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's your stage.
Okay, so just to go off the professor's question, we did create our policies to align with the economic goals of Greenland. And so when we developed these policies, we looked at the ways of minimizing costs and staying sustainable, but also creating an inclusive policy that would include rural communities, shoreline communities, and even researchers. So to take into account all of the costs of this, we did actually suggest that budget allocations be reallocated to more productive areas. As you can see, we saw that social policy accounted for about 36% of the budget. And we estimated, or we inferred that the money that was put into this into social policy were actually just income, like what's the word? They were like monetary handouts and things that were used to combat against poverty through social monetary handouts. Yeah. If we take a portion of that and transfer it to, say, education, infrastructure, and energy, we can properly utilize these funds in investing more into these areas, especially education, where tertiary education can open up more job opportunities in areas that are more needed in Greenland. And this will also influence the rise in wages and hopefully lift people out of poverty. More onto that though, is that our main projects, Agroforestry and Wave Power, look to including communities within the decisions and within the projects themselves to stimulate the economy, to stimulate local economies. Agroforestry is the idea that you are planting trees alongside your crops. This will, in effect, try to improve the quality of the soil and improve the quality of the groundwater and surface runoff by producing a more stable land. But it is also a good way to capture carbon and to reduce air pollutants. And it is also a really easy way to implement things just by, say, subsidizing tree saplings and encouraging the implementation of more organic or fertilizers, because that is one of the issues of soil erosion, that overexploitation of land. And
thank you, Anna, for your answer. Sorry for interrupt, but your time is over for this one. I'd like to take a question from Bricky, and since we're reaching the end of the Q&A session, these would be the last questions asked from the teams, and then I would give one more chance to the professors if they have a question, and then we would conclude. So, Bricky, go on.
Yep. I want to ask the team just in time.
Just in time, do you accept this question?
Yes.
Okay, go on, Bricky.
Yes, you mentioned in the policy that you would like to build some float tunnels, which, as I know, is for preparing for the tsunami, where the waters would just come in and then go. But if you're prepared for the rising sea level, which is chronic, and the water won't leave anymore, for me it feels like there's a connection of the float water around the entire country, which will increase the risk of waterborne diseases like cholera. If that is the case, how would you prepare for that, could be a possible national disease for Greenland? Yes.
Just in time, your answer.
Okay, I will answer. To begin with, the flood tunnel is not created to mitigate the tsunami, but it's more due to flooding. So for the flood tunnel, yes, it's true that we aim to store the water temporarily. However, we aim to divert the water streams to other water sources, such as the nearby streams or even back to the sea. There's even considerations of us tending to treat the water for water consumption, since in the current age and also in the nearby future there'll be an issue of the water scarcity, clean water scarcity, and that is something that we aim to counteract.
All right, thank you for your answer.
Perhaps I could interject for the last part as well. Sorry, is that time?
Go on. Yeah, you have one.
Yes. Okay, so Bricky's part about how water, at least the rising sea levels, could lead to more waterborne diseases like cholera. I do believe that there are other diseases as well that could be more, and the healthcare ecosystem of Greenland will be put to the test. But I believe that with already current modern technology, cholera can be dealt with and would not be the significant issue of that portion. Thank you.
And now I'd like to take a question from Team Greedy Greens, Dayung Lim.
Okay, I would like to ask a question to Team Just in Time.
Just in time.
Sure.
All right, sure.
All right. Go ahead, ask, and can you please speak a little louder?
Okay. First of all, thank you for your interesting ideas to deal with the problem. As you have also acknowledged in your possible limitations, there is the issue of stagnant water. Moreover, we are concerned that artificially pollinating the forest may be challenging. So we want to ask your opinions about how you would like to plan to deal with these potential problems.
Is it possible you can repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question quickly?
Okay. As you have also acknowledged in your possible limitations, there is the issue of stagnant water. Moreover, we are concerned that artificially pollinating the forest may be challenging. We want to ask your opinions about how you would like to plan to deal with these potential problems.
Okay, so just to summarize here, you are asking just in time for the advice on two specific matters. One, of stagnant water, and two, of artificially pollinating forests. Is that correct? Have I summarized the question properly?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, I do believe that these two areas have very different implications in very different sectors. For example, stagnant water. The biggest health concern that I find will be in terms of emerging infectious diseases like malaria and dengue. And that is because with the climate simply shifting towards more of a tropical one, the diseases and the immunity of the population is not well equipped for that. And how do we address that in the first place? Now, that is simply by adopting measures that a lot of tropical climate countries have done, and that is health literacy and health education. Public health interventions have been shown to show huge efficacy in the fight against such emerging infectious diseases. But in terms of artificially pollinating forests, there are more innovative measures that can be dealt with. And I believe some of my other associates have ideas about that, so I'll yield the time over.
All right.
Sorry for interrupt, but we think that Just-in-Time misunderstood our question. We asked about the water problem, but Just-in-Time explained about like education or other things. So,
but the response has been recorded, and because we don't have more time to go on for just one question.
Okay, thank you. It's okay.
So we won't be repeating the question or having session again.
Yeah.
I'd like to take the question from Justin Wong from Just-in-Time.
Yeah, sorry for interruption again.
Sorry, actually, is it possible for me to concede my question to team member Rustam instead?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, sure. Now, the second part of the question was about artificially pollinating forests. I do believe that this is a concern that economies around the world are currently facing today. So
I'm sorry to interject, but like I want to take a question from Just-in-Time because the previous question has been answered.
Okay.
So if there's a question for somebody.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, so we can pose a question now to them? Okay, all right. So sorry, my question that I would like to share with the floor today will be addressed to both parties here. And it would be about in your proposals, thank you so much for writing them. I do believe they are filled with many innovative ideas. And I do believe that it has been touched upon previously about how to actualize and execute those innovative ideas and technologies. But with the situation being that you are in 2051 and you are currently facing climate change, what do you think will be your transitional plan to actualize those technologies? What is the policy that you have in mind in terms of short-term technological execution that you have to better the lives of Greenland? I'd like to hear from both sides, Really Green as well as Pioneer. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but like it's better if we keep the question like one-on-one, so you can ask one team at a time.
Oh, okay. So we cannot ask two. Okay, then I would like to ask Pioneer this question.
All right, Pioneer, do you want to answer this question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'll just start off quickly. I think that we would probably focus on the less expensive policies first so that we can build up more infrastructure and more wealth before we would initiate the more expensive policies. A lot of our policies don't actually cost anything, so they would be implemented immediately. For example, our taxation and subsidy policy, where the income that the government receives from the taxation is then immediately respent in the form of subsidies, and that will automatically redistribute the way that money flows in the economy, and it will favor renewable energy sources. So that will increase private investment in renewable energy sources and reduce it in fossil fuels a little bit. And that will sort of happen automatically and will be ongoing throughout the entire process. And then our agroforestry policies are relatively inexpensive and involve communities, increase jobs. So those would be the policies.
I wanted to clarify that it's about more timeline, not budget, if it's possible.
Timeline, okay. So, well, those policies would be the ones we would implement first in the timeline. And then later on in the timeline, we would move on to the more expensive policies. So we would begin infrastructure investment after that, once we have a little bit more funding for that. And then the infrastructure investment would focus a little on renewables and on improving transportation mechanisms. And then as that grows, we can increase our investment in renewables. And that's the trajectory I think we would aim to take in terms of the timeline. Did anyone else want to add on?
Can I add on something?
Yes, you have 1 more minute.
Yep. So for the at our beginning, our policy is to cut down a part of the social policy budget onto the education, because we are standing on a developed country view to help developing country, and we can't stop them development, but instead we can help them education and educate their children, which hopefully they can teach them how to investigate, how to research, and how to build on some new technology that's suitable in their unique situation in their country. And we believe that children education are the future of this country. And by 2070, there's 30 years, which means there's another generation, there's another hope for it.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. And now I'd like to leave the stage open for the professors for their final question, if they have any, before we move on to the concluding speeches from the teams. Honorable Professors Byung-Ah Shin and Soo-Young Kim, do you have any further questions to ask?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay.
I have a quick question about, well, it's a question for 3D Green. It's a very, very small question. So policies recommending some educational measures or training programs seem to be rely on very much voluntary participation. So usually policy scholars are very skeptical of such policies relying on the will or goodwill of citizens. So I wonder how strongly you believe in the effectiveness or efficacy of such programs, more or less more or less not very voluntary anyway. Yeah.
Okay, you may answer the question, Greedy Greens.
Okay, I will answer the question. So it is true that the education is in need of voluntary aspects, but I believe this team believes that although education could take time, it could be a long-term education if it continues to be, if it continues to implement the education policies, it would be effective enough.
To add the statements, what I can think of the voluntary education effects in terms of the innovative technology is the applications of COTRAC, because we expect both of companies and the citizens to be more aware of the environmental factors while using the app. So it is kind of an educational app. But actually, to promote the activities and the participation in the app, we try to give them some incentives for the activity. So for example, users are given a points that they can use in the when they're purchasing some products for the voting or some buying some green products. And at the same time, company will gain profit from the advertisement effect of being green to the citizens. So we believe that with the combinations of incentives and the educational effects, we can enhance and increase the frequency of the activities and participation in the education.
Also, to add to that, we think that for our policies, we have the ESD policy and ETS policy, which limits the which limits the amount of pollution that the industry or person can emit. And we think that those people can also use our education to actually reduce the carbon emission, so that they can take advantage of the education to lower the tax that they have to need or lower the energy cost that they have to pay. And that's directly beneficial for them economically. So I think that for those cases, their willingness to take the education is very high.
Add one more, just as mandatory education in Korea, such as many elementary or middle schools deals with environmental education, we think that Greenland also contains some mandatory environmental education in their school program. And for younger generation, the VIR and other all voluntary campaign can make synergy with those mandatory education. And when they grow up, the whole social environment will change to eco-friendly. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so that concludes our question answer session. And before we move on to the concluding remark, I would like to extend my gratitude to the professors for taking part in this session and asking valuable questions. I'd like to express my gratitude to all the participants for giving in valuable ideas and spending their time. And I'd like to make a concluding remark before I invite the teams to make their concluding speeches. I think the main dilemma of the scenario remained undiscussed mostly during this debate and question answer session. Also, teams engaged with each other through asking questions, but most of the debate that I saw was focused more on agriculture-based solutions or to enhance the livestock or the yield from the crops. But the crux of the issue here is industrialization, which is causing carbon dioxide emission, excessive carbon dioxide emission, which is causing air pollution and global warming, and which is causing health deterioration. So there wasn't much focus on health initiatives. There wasn't much focus on the main primary agenda here, which is the reduction in carbon dioxide. And the country of Greenland faces an international ultimatum of reducing the carbon dioxide by 60%. So we need to find other ways or renegotiate it in some way, or if we're adhering to the Daejeon Protocol in itself, then we have to strategize to achieve that radical goal of cutting down 60% carbon dioxide. So for that, we need a major viable and renewable energy source. We talked a lot about green energies in this debate and presentation session, but looking at the data, most of the propositions that were given, they were quite you could say difficult to implement from a realistic point of view. And that's my say on today's discussion. Nonetheless, the ideas that were given regarding the health benefits or health initiatives or the increasing the livestock yield and the crop yield, they were quite valuable and they may prove to be very successful. But having said that, even those proposals were very financially burdensome. So for a developing country which doesn't have a very high GDP or GDP per capita and economical figures, it's very difficult to say if they would yield result in a given stipulated period of time. And all the matters that are given scenario are of urgent and imminent nature. So I once again thank you all for devoting your time to putting together these solutions and ideas, beautiful ideas. And now I would like to leave the stage open for the participating teams to give their concluding speeches. The order would be Just in Time, followed by Greedy Greens, and then lastly Pioneer. So Just in Time, your concluding speech.
All right, testing. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for this rousing discussion today. I do believe we've covered a lot of good topics, and as mentioned by our MC, we have left the crux of it left unsaid. Now, please take note that this is in the context of 2051. In 2047, the Daejeon Protocol was signed, and in 7 years, I repeat, 7 years, Greenland will undergo a tragic sort of international confrontation. And this is not something that we want. And if you look at our policies and our slide deck, you would see that from the very get-go, our short-term plan was to enter the international stage and lead this discussion and renegotiate and finance short-term borrowing. These were all in our roadmap that we hope to achieve because we understand that the Daejeon Protocol, the first part at least, is to renegotiate this on the front of communication, to sit down on this table of brotherhood and fight against the common enemy, climate change. That's why we declare war on climate change at the very first step we did. Now, we understand that our policies are not perfect, and we understand that they have their own flaws, but that is why we've implemented multiple policies that complement one another and address the limitations of each other perfectly. It's impossible to come up with a 100% perfect policy, and we hope that by combining the different solutions that we have seen today as well, Greenland will not be facing that bad of an issue if we combine all of it. Now, from what we know, there's little to no groundwork for environmental or lifestyle changes in the current Greenland policies. And because of that, we have actually decided in our short-term plan that we should target those things, such as educational, such as multinational, and even social policies. But all those things take time, and we have illustrated that in our transitional plan, in our short-term, intermediate term, and long-term. You cannot simply uproot a strong, comfortable level of economic growth. And we know for a fact that country leaders will never simply introduce taxes without a proper roadmap. It is gradual, it is transitional, and you need public discourse. There will always be pushback. And with a very precarious political climate, such as in Greenland, we know for a fact that this needs to be done with tact. And that is why our roadmap has been made with such details and such nuances. 7 years to the Daejeon Protocol. The year is 2051, and in 2057, the Daejeon Protocol is 9. The countries will force Greenland to cut down by a drastic 60%, which we feel is an impossible amount. But at the same time, this is not just an environmental problem to solve. This is a human-centric crisis that requires all stakeholders to unite, to respect, and to work together. The technologies that should be put forth should not just be in environmental, it should be in health, as we have pointed out in our slide deck earlier, such as oxygen bars, but we have not received any question on it. Now, we hope that we can salvage this situation for the entire of Greenland, for the companies, for the people, for the sick, for the poor. We hope to salvage this situation just in time and push them to a better future with a green leap forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful concluding speech. And now I'd like to give the stage to Greedy Greens to conclude their session today with a concluding speech.
Before we start, can we share the screen?
Yeah, if you want to share the screen, you may go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for giving me the chance to give the concluding speech. So Greenland has been put in a situation to aggressively reduce carbon emission. Although the protocol of reducing carbon dioxide by 60% in 10 years seems harsh, we actually see this as a new opportunity for Greenland to solve its environmental problems that it had been ignoring for the past decades. We believe that clean environment, economic growth, and citizens' happiness are all essential values we must keep, and not one should be sacrificed for the other. Our policies are carefully set up to preserve all three values. So the MC has mentioned that our policies may not be sufficient enough to reduce the carbon emission by 60%. However, we think that it is achievable with our policies. The main policy making it possible is emission trading system, which is our first policy. This policy has already been proven to be successful in Europe, reducing 35% greenhouse gases from the year 2005 to 2019. Considering the urgency of the situation in Greenland, a more aggressive measure to cut down the total carbon emission limit can actually make this policy more effective. Also, with this policy, combined with ESG scores, eco-friendly fuel economy, reducing pollutants from fashion industry, and energy efficient policy, we can help to make the environment clean through providing regulations to companies. Compulsory education for environment, installation of trash bank, and volume-based garbage system triggers citizens' awareness for the government of the environment and induce participation of the public for clean environment. Popularizing VR Capsule helps citizens access VR technology, which can help the environment and improve people's mental health, considering that people has to be in Greenland. Along with our policy that we seek to preserve three essential values, we also present three innovative solutions that works with the policy to actively tackle and solving the environmental problems. Our first solution, VR Capsule, grants its users comfortable virtual reality experience and supports all senses, including taste, smell, and texture. Inside VR Capsule, users are connected to his or her own virtual reality. And these VR capsules bring many benefits, including promoting economic activity, reducing the community by a virtual workspace, virtual education, and promoting happiness by staying in a cost-free VR environment. So this solution that helps the environment while improving productiveness as well as happiness at Greenland. Our second solution, Green Dome, is a large-scale dome to cover up the areas that are producing greenhouse gas emissions and capture carbon dioxide from these emissions. The dome will capture carbon dioxide molecules and transfer them into underground storage using specially designed pipes. This process can naturally dissolve these molecules produced and even use them as other energy resources other than fossil fuels, relieving air pollution and temperature rise in Greenland. Finally, our co-track is a platform that can increase the environment sensitivity of users and companies, which rewards both participants. Each company is rated based on their ESG score, and users can vote for companies that seem to successfully achieve green growth. So users can participate with high grades. This incentivizes the users to participate and also helps the company to be more eco-friendly. Greenland, a country once green, has suffered environmentally for rapid economic growth. We show that through our policies and solutions that environment does not have to be sacrificed for economic growth. Like our slogan, we really want to make Greenland green again. Thank you.
Thank you for your concluding speech. And now we would move to the last concluding speech for this session, which goes to Pioneer.
Hey, yeah. So to summarize the points brought up by my team today, it is Pioneer's mission to ensure national and international action and accountability is received. Pioneer sees it is appropriate to reallocate percentages in the national budget to simultaneously alleviate climate change effects and to reduce social inequality. Furthermore, it is not about building from the ground up, it is about adaptability, taking what resources Greenland has around to our advantage for the survival of the country. Through this, we bring about our goals of sustainable development, poverty reduction, and enhancing the quality of life. By introducing the national policy of tree planting, we can create a nation that is adequately fed, improve clean water and food access, and most of all, reduce the poverty that is prevailing in the country. Moreover, that there is no fast solution that reduces the water levels that has risen near the shore. So we have planned to have urban development near the shoreline, leveraging this change to enhance the quality of life for the people by implementing renewable energy sources such as wave power and wind energy. As a result, we create a nation that is resilient and self-sustainable, socially, economically, and environmentally. Additionally, introducing the global emission scheme that allocates emission trading units, or ETUs as we called it, for countries based on their development level and their population size, we can encourage all nations to invest in renewable energy. Overall, to achieve the outcome of sustainable energy and harmonious living with nature, Pioneer seeks to draw sponsorship from ethical investment funds established both nationally and internationally, in addition to the financial support we'll get from the government. By partnerships with international research communities, trustworthy implementation companies, and local communities of labor forces, we prioritize the development of environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESGs, factors in our actions, while also returning investor ends of the fund's expandable profits. This plan will address the uneven playing field between OECD countries and developing nations, in hopes where the world for all nations are in collaboration than competition, we can create a more livable planet. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for nice concluding remarks. And this culminates our today's first debate session for the environment and climate change scenario. To end today's session, I would like to extend my thanks to all the participants for actively engaging with each other in a constructive debate, or rather a discussion, and the professors who asked really valuable questions to the students and participants, and to everybody who was involved in organizing this session. And I would like to announce that we will be back with the next session for today's scenario with 3 other teams at 1 p.m. today. So all the audience and viewers, please keep tuned, stay tuned, and I'll see you back later at 1 p.m. This debate session is now closed. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.